She was trembling when her father pushed her off the wagon, sold like livestock to a man she'd never met. But the quiet rancher didn't just open his door, he opened his heart. The wagon wheels hadn't even stopped turning before he shoved her down. "Get off," her father barked. "This here's your stop." Clara hit the dirt hard. Her palms scraped against gravel and dried mud, and her knees stung beneath the thin, patched cotton of her dress. She blinked fast, more out of habit than hope, because tears had long since dried up. There were no more left. Not after last night. Not after what he'd said. What he'd sold. The man on the porch didn't move. He sat still in his chair, broad shoulders barely shifting beneath his worn flannel, arms folded tight across his chest, his hat low, eyes hidden in shadow. Just watching. That silence made her insides curl. "She's all yours," the man on. The wagon spat, then tossed a small burlap sack onto the dirt beside her. "Her name's Clara. Ain't much use, but she's clean and quiet. You said you needed help." He didn't even look at her when he turned the wagon around. Didn't say. Goodbye, didn't even pretend to care. Clara didn't get up. She sat in the dust and held her own arms as the wagon rattled away, shrinking into the distance with the sound of hooves against hard-packed earth. Her fingers trembled around her elbows. Not from cold, it was June, but from something deeper, like her whole life had just snapped in half. The man finally stood. Boots heavy on the porch wood, steps slow but steady, he approached. Clara didn't dare lift her chin until he stopped just a few feet away. Even then, it took everything in her to look up. He was younger than she expected. 30, maybe, with sunburnt skin and a face carved from stone. Not angry, not cruel, just empty, like he'd forgotten what it meant to feel. "You hungry?" he asked. Clara swallowed hard. She nodded. He didn't offer a hand, just turned and walked toward the barn. Not the house. No words about what she was to do, where she was to go, how long he'd keep her. Just started walking like the whole thing was settled. Maybe it was. She scrambled up, took the sack he'd tossed, and followed. The barn smelled of hay and old wood, clean but worn. There was a cot tucked into one corner with a folded wool blanket on it, a metal wash basin, and nothing else. The rancher pointed at the cot. "You'll sleep here," he said, "at least until I know if you're trouble." "I'm not," she said, voice small. He looked at her. Not through her. At her. Like he was trying to read something in her face. She stiffened under the weight of it. But after a moment, he just gave a single nod. "Good." He turned to leave. She panicked. "Wait, what's your name?" He paused at the barn door. "Isaac." And then he left. That first night, Clara didn't sleep. She lay still on the cot, hands folded beneath her chin, listening to the sound of wind creaking the rafters. Her stomach ached from the single piece of cornbread she'd managed to eat, and her heart ached even more. Who was this man? Why had he taken her in? And why hadn't he looked at her the way her father used to, like she was something broken he couldn't wait to throw away? The next morning, Isaac woke her before sunrise. "Chores," he said, handing her a bucket. They didn't talk. He showed her how to collect eggs, how to feed the hens, how to clean the stalls. His movements were efficient, sharp, but not cruel. He didn't bark orders or scold. He just worked, and she followed. And for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of the man standing beside her. She learned fast. By the third day, she'd learned to read the horse's moods. By the fifth, she could haul water without sloshing it everywhere. By the seventh, she caught Isaac watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, not with suspicion, with curiosity. He didn't ask where she came from. He didn't ask what her father had done. And she didn't ask him why he lived alone on a ranch 3 miles from the nearest town, silent and brooding, never smiling, never speaking unless he had to. But sometimes, in the quiet before chores, she'd catch him staring off at the hills, jaw tight, something flickering behind his eyes, like he was carrying something heavy. And it wasn't just the ranch. One evening, 2 weeks after she'd arrived, Clara was washing the dishes in the barn's small sink. Isaac stood at the door, watching the sky as storm clouds rolled in fast. Thunder rumbled like distant hoofbeats. "You ever scared of storms?" he asked suddenly. She jumped. It was the first time he'd spoken all day. "I used to be," she said. "Not anymore." "Why not?" She dried her hands on her skirt. "Because fear doesn't stop the thunder. It just makes you cold while you wait." He turned his head. "Just slightly, enough to glance at her out of the corner of his eye. You talk like someone twice your age." She shrugged. "Maybe I am." The rain started. Slow at first, then a downpour. Isaac stepped back inside and closed the barn doors. Neither of them moved for a long while. That night, thunder shook the rafters. Clara lay on her cot wide awake. The baby foal in the stall beside her was whining, and the wind howled like wolves outside. She pressed the blanket to her chest and tried to breathe slow. The barn door creaked open. She sat up fast, heart pounding. Isaac stood in the doorway, holding something wrapped in cloth. "You forgot your supper," he said. She took it with both hands, eyes wide. "Thank you." He hesitated. "You all right in here?" She nodded. "Yes, it's just loud." He looked toward the rafters. "It'll pass." She gave a soft smile. "Everything does." He lingered a second longer, then turned and left. Again. The days stretched. Then weeks. By the end of the third, Clara had begun to hum when she worked, softly, mostly when she thought he wasn't listening. But sometimes Isaac would pause his hammering, or set down the feed sack and listen without speaking. She still hadn't touched the house. Not once had he invited her inside, but he hadn't sent her away either, and he never raised his voice, never slammed a door, never touched her, not even once, not when her foot slipped stepping off the fence rail, not when her sleeve caught on a nail and tore. He just handed her a needle and thread and told her to fix it. She didn't know if it was kindness or distance, but it was better than fear. Then everything changed. It was late. She'd stayed longer in the field pulling weeds near the south fence, lost track of time. The sun dipped fast behind the ridge. She was hurrying back when she heard voices. Not Isaac. Strangers. 3 men on horses, drinking from their flasks, laughing. One of them saw her and called out, "Hey now, where'd he find this little filly?" She froze. The man dismounted. She took a step back. "Easy, I'm just asking directions." He grinned, but his eyes said something else. The other 2 laughed. Clara turned to run, but he caught her wrist. "What's the hurry, sweetheart?" Then a sound like thunder, but it wasn't from the sky. Isaac's shotgun fired once, into the air. All 3 men spun toward the barn. Isaac stood on the porch, that same flannel shirt rolled to his elbows, shotgun in hand, eyes cold as ice. "Let her go," he said. The man holding her sneered. "We were just talking." "Let her go," Isaac repeated, stepping forward. He didn't raise his voice, but the steel in it was enough to make the drunk drop her wrist. Clara stumbled back, ran straight for the barn. Behind her, Isaac stood silent as the 3 men mounted their horses and rode off with curses under their breath. He never said a word about it after, just made sure the shotgun stayed by the door. And from that night forward, Clara noticed something different in the way he looked at her. Not pity, not suspicion. Something quieter. Like maybe, for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone either. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, eyes fixed on the wooden beams above her, her heartbeat slow but heavy. She could still feel the man's grip on her wrist, could still hear his slurred laugh echoing off the darkening fields. But more than that, she could still see Isaac's face, calm, steady, unblinking as he stared down 3 armed men with Nothing but his word and that old shotgun. It wasn't just protection. It was promise. She wasn't alone anymore. By sunrise, the sky had cleared, and with it came something new in Clara. A sense she hadn't felt in years. Safety. Not just safety, but permission. Permission to be. She left the barn early and fed the hens without waiting for instruction. Drew water from the well, set it near the barn for Isaac's morning wash. When he came out, coffee mug in one hand and hair still wet from the basin, he looked at her with something close to surprise. "You're early," he said. She didn't stop scrubbing the porch rail. "I didn't want to be late." He didn't say more. But he lingered near the fence longer than usual that morning, watching the sunrise, watching her. The following days carried a quiet rhythm. Clara stayed ahead of the chores. Isaac built a second fence along the southern boundary. They didn't speak often, but when they did, their words felt less like bricks being stacked and more like threads being sewn. On the 10th day after the men came, Isaac asked her if she knew how to ride. Clara shook her head. He saddled his mare. "Anyway, we'll start slow," he said. "She's gentle." She hesitated beside the saddle. "What if I fall?" He handed her the reins. "Then you'll get back up." She swallowed hard and climbed up. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't look away. He walked beside her as the horse moved in slow circles around the yard. At first, she gripped the horn like her life depended on it. But Isaac's voice was steady at her side. "Loosen your hands. She'll feel your fear." Clara tried. They circled once, then again. He paused her with a hand to the bridle. "You're not bad," he said, quiet. She met his eyes. "Maybe. I'm just trying harder than most." He nodded once. "That's worth something." Later that evening, as they sat on the barn steps eating supper, salted pork and boiled potatoes, Clara finally asked the question that had been pressing her chest for weeks. "Why'd you take me in?" Isaac didn't answer right away. He chewed slow, looking out toward the distant tree line, as if the answer might be walking up the path. "Man came through town," he said at last. "Said he had a daughter he didn't want. Needed coin for his debt." She felt her stomach twist. "I didn't want a wife. Didn't need a hand." His voice was low, measured. "But when he talked about you, Clara, it made me sick. The way he spoke, like you were nothing." Her voice was a whisper. "And that made you want to buy me?" He looked at her then, hard, but not unkind. "I didn't buy you. I saved you from him." The words sat between them. A long moment passed. "I'm not your daughter," she said. "I know. I'm not your servant either." "I know that too." She folded her hands. "Then what am I?" Isaac set his bowl aside. "I don't know yet, but I figure you ought to be the one to decide." That night she wept, not because she was afraid, but because the knot in her chest had started to loosen. No one had ever told her she had a choice, not once in 19 years. And here, on a lonely ranch with a man more silent than a thundercloud, she'd been given something more powerful than safety. She'd been given space. It was on the third Sunday that he took her to town. They didn't talk about it much. Isaac just saddled 2 horses, handed her a dress he said had belonged to his late wife, and nodded toward the barn door. Clara blinked at the soft blue fabric. "You want me to wear this?" "Only if you want to." She changed behind the hay bales. The dress was worn but clean, and it fit better than anything she'd ever owned. When she stepped out, brushing the wrinkles from the skirt, she caught Isaac's stare for the first time. He didn't smile, but something in his face softened. They rode to town in silence. The church was small, just a whitewashed frame building with wooden pews and dusty hymnals. Isaac hadn't said a word on the road there, but as they reached the steps, he paused. "You don't have to go in if you don't want." "I want to," he nodded. Stay close." Inside, the congregation was already seated. They were mostly ranch folk, men with calloused hands and women in faded dresses, children squirming between them. When Isaac stepped through the doorway, heads turned. Then whispers started. "Is that Isaac? Thought he left town for good." "No, he's been living out past Miller Creek." "But who's the girl?" Clara felt them all. The eyes, the questions, but she stood tall beside him. Her hands, folded in front of her, chin lifted. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. She wasn't ashamed. Not anymore. After service, a woman in her 40s with a neat braid and a faded floral bonnet approached them outside. "You must be Clara," she said kindly. Clara nodded. "I'm Sarah Whitlow. My husband is the blacksmith here. We've known Isaac for years. He hasn't brought anyone to church since—" She stopped herself. Isaac gave a polite nod. "Sarah," Clara smiled. "It's nice to meet you." The woman hesitated. "If you ever need anything, our home is just 2 streets east. You're welcome any time." It wasn't just kindness, it was invitation. A way into a world Clara had always been locked out of. She didn't know how to say thank you, so she just said, "I'd like that." On the way home, Isaac finally spoke. "You handled yourself well." Clara looked at him. "Did I?" He nodded. "People talk. Doesn't mean you need to listen." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "What if what they say is true?" He slowed his horse, then looked over. "Then they don't need to say it out loud. And you don't need to carry what ain't yours to carry." By the time they returned to the ranch, the wind had picked up, another storm rolling in. But this time, Clara wasn't afraid. She stood by the window in the barn as the first raindrops began to fall and whispered to herself, "Everything passes." Behind her, Isaac moved through the barn with a quietness that didn't startle. He picked up an extra blanket from a trunk and set it on the cot without a word. Then, for the first time, he didn't walk away. He stood beside her, watching the rain. And then he asked softly, "Do you want to come inside? To the house, I mean." Clara blinked. He didn't look at her, just kept his gaze on the storm, but his voice was low, uncertain. "I figure you've earned a real bed." She turned to him. "I'd like that." She followed him across the yard, heart hammering in her chest. Not out of fear, out of something else. Something she didn't have a name for yet. The house was simple. 2 rooms, wood floors, a worn hearth. It smelled of cedar and smoke. There was a single picture on the mantel, a woman with kind eyes and a baby on her hip. Clara stared at it. Isaac cleared his throat. "Wife, Ruth, we lost the baby before his first year." She turned to him. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "Me too." She looked around. "Why'd you keep the photo?" His answer came slow. "To remind me I had something worth missing." She didn't press further. He showed her the spare room, freshly dusted, a quilt laid neat on the bed, a lamp beside it. "You don't have to stay if it's too soon," he said. Clara looked him in the eye. "I want to." And this time, he smiled. That night, the rain fell hard, but the house was warm, and Clara, for the first time since her mother died, slept in a real bed. Not just safe, but wanted. Clara woke to sunlight. Not the sharp, blinding kind that comes too fast through broken shutters, but a warm, golden stream through a clean window, falling gently on the quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. It was the first time in years she hadn't been startled awake. No shouting, no heavy footsteps on creaking floorboards, just the chirp of birds in the tree out front and the distant sound of a wood axe splitting logs. She sat up slowly, ran, her hands over the soft wool blanket. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she remembered Isaac, and the night before, and the way he'd stood beside her while the rain fell, like he'd been waiting longer than he could admit. She rose quietly and pulled on her dress from the day before. She found a brush in the drawer beside the bed, one someone had used often and then not at all, and slowly she untangled her hair. By the time she stepped outside, Isaac had already stacked half a cord of firewood and was pouring water over, his hands at the pump. He looked up as she approached. "Sleep all right?" She nodded, hesitant. "I didn't wake up once." He gave a soft grunt of approval, then handed her a cup of fresh water. "That's something." They didn't talk much. Over breakfast, just ate bread with honey and drank hot coffee that made her eyes water. But something had changed between them. Not loud, just steadier, like two people realizing the storm might actually be behind them. That afternoon, Isaac taught her how to use a handsaw. "You gotta let the saw do the work," he said. "Push too hard and you'll bind the teeth." Clara watched, then tried. Her first few attempts were slow and uneven, but he didn't correct her, just let her struggle through it, then nodded when the plank split cleanly. "Better than most boys your age," he muttered. She looked up. "Is that a compliment?" He smirked faintly. "Best you'll get out of me." Days passed like that. Quiet work, steady meals. Little by little, the barn began to take new shape. She helped him hang new rafters, scrape mildew from the root, cellar, even repaired a broken fence post by herself while he was off in town getting nails. When he came back and saw it, he paused. "You did that?" "I did." He knelt beside it, tested the wood, then stood. "It'll hold." That night, she asked about the mare. "She yours?" she said as they stabled the horses. He nodded. "Had her since she was born. Her mother died during birth." Clara ran her hand along the mare's side. "She's gentle." Isaac didn't say anything for a while. Then, quietly, "Had to be. She was all I had for a while." Clara looked at him, and in the stillness, a question formed on her lips. "Isaac, why do you live alone?" He glanced at her, thoughtful. "After Ruth passed, I didn't see much point in company. Townfolk didn't either. I wasn't the same." She waited. He leaned against the post. "I blamed God for a while. Then I blamed myself. Then I stopped blaming anyone and just worked until I couldn't think anymore." Her voice was soft. "And now?" He looked out toward the hills. "I think I'm still figuring it out." Later that week, a letter arrived. Isaac found it in the drop box outside town and brought it in, unopened. Clara watched him set it on the table. He stared at it like it might catch fire. "You gonna read it?" she asked. He exhaled. "Eventually." She nodded and turned to leave, but paused. "Was it from her?" His jaw tightened. "No. Her brother." She said nothing more. Just left the room. That night, after the lanterns had been blown out and the only sound in the house was the crackle of the hearth, Clara came out of her room and found him sitting at the kitchen table. The letter opened in front of him, unread. He looked up. "Can't bring myself to look," he said. She walked over and sat across from him. "Then let me." His eyes met hers, tired but grateful. She picked up the letter and began to read aloud. It was short, blunt. Her brother-in-law was passing through in a week, said he wanted to see the property, make sure Isaac was still of sound mind. It was worded politely enough, but Clara caught the tone beneath it. Suspicion, judgment. She folded the letter. "Do you want him here?" Isaac shook his head. "No." "Then don't let him come." He sighed. "It's not that simple. He's family." Clara folded her arms. "Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shares your life." That stopped him. She stood, set, the letter down. "Let me handle it when he comes." The next few days passed quickly. Isaac showed her how to set fence lines using a taut string and hand-driven stakes. She helped him patch the corner of the roof that had been leaking since last spring. Their hands got blistered, their clothes worn. But with every hour of labor, Clara felt something in her begin to root. She was no longer a visitor here. She belonged. Then, on the 7th morning, a carriage rolled down the long dirt road, dust curling behind its wheels. Clara was splitting kindling when Isaac stepped out. Of the house, shoulders already tense, the carriage stopped. A man in a clean brown coat and stiff hat stepped down. He looked out of place, his boots too new, his hands too smooth. "Isaac," he said dryly. "Caleb." Clara stayed by the stump, watching. Caleb glanced toward her. And this would be... Isaac stepped beside her. "Clara. She lives here." Caleb raised a brow. "I see." The silence stretched. Then Caleb smiled tightly. "Mind if we walk the property?" Isaac hesitated, then nodded. Clara followed them at a distance. She watched Caleb poke at fence posts, question the feed bins, examine the tool shed. She could feel the judgment in every glance. When they circled back to the porch, Caleb turned. "Mind if we speak privately?" Isaac opened his mouth, but Clara stepped forward. "No." Both men looked at her. She folded her arms. "You can say whatever you need to say in front of me. I live here too." Caleb scoffed. "Is that how it is now? You take in some girl off the road and let her speak for your household?" Isaac's jaw tightened. Clara stepped forward. "I wasn't off the road. I was sold." Caleb's smile faltered. "She was 19, abandoned, and I brought her here because it was better than leaving her in a bar with a drunk and a broken jaw." Caleb looked at Isaac. "And what is she to you?" Isaac looked at Clara, then back at Caleb. "She's mine." That silenced the yard. Clara stared at him, breath caught in her throat. Caleb adjusted his coat. "You always were too sentimental." Turned and left without another word. That evening, Isaac didn't say much, just built a fire, made supper, then sat out under the stars with a glass of cold cider and his thoughts. Clara joined him. For a long time, they said nothing. Then Isaac spoke. "I'm sorry if that wasn't the right way to say it." She looked at him. "It was." He turned to her, face unreadable. "You've been here a month now?" She nodded. "I don't want you to feel trapped." "I don't." He paused. "Then maybe it's time you had your own say." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean this land. It's not much, but it's quiet, safe. It's home. And if you want to stay here, really stay here, it shouldn't be as a guest." Her heart started to race. He looked away. "I'd never ask. Anything you weren't ready for, and I don't expect anything from you. But if you ever wanted more than safety, more than shelter, I'd stand beside you." Clara's voice trembled. "Are you asking me to marry you?" He turned to her. "No. I'm telling you I would, if you asked first." Tears welled in her eyes. She stood, walked over, and took his hand. "I'm asking." They were married the next morning. No big ceremony. Just a simple word in front of the preacher in town. Sarah Whitlow was the witness. Isaac wore his best shirt. Clara wore the same blue dress he'd given her weeks ago. It was enough. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, Clara leaned against him on the saddle and whispered, "I'm not scared anymore." Isaac looked down at her. "You never had to be." But peace doesn't last forever. The next morning, a letter came, not in Caleb's handwriting, but in her father's. Just 4 words. "I'm coming for her." The moment Clara read the letter, her heart stopped. Her hand clenched the page so tightly her knuckles turned white. Isaac had just come in from the morning round, dirt on his sleeves, sweat at his brow, when he noticed the expression on her face. She didn't speak, She simply handed him the letter. He read it once, then again. It was barely a sentence, but it was enough to punch a hole in the morning's peace. I'm coming for her. No signature, no address. But Clara knew that handwriting like she knew the shape of her own shadow. Her father hadn't written to her in years, not once since. The day he'd dragged her into the saloon by the wrist, exchanged her for coin, and left without looking back. But now he wanted her again? Isaac folded the note slowly. He doesn't know where we are. Clara's voice was thin. What if he finds out? Isaac looked her straight in the eye. Then he'll be met at the fence. She searched his face, trying to measure his calm. Isaac, he's not a man who walks away easy. He placed the letter on the table. Neither am I. The week that followed felt like a lifetime. Isaac doubled the rounds around the property. Every morning he checked the trails leading into the valley. He moved the horses to the upper barn and reinforced the latches. Clara pretended to keep herself busy, mending, folding, sweeping, but her hands shook often. Every sound outside made her startle. Then one evening, as the sun dipped behind the pine ridge, they heard it, a single gunshot in the woods. Isaac was at the door before the echo faded. Clara followed, heart hammering in her chest. He held out, an arm to stop her. Stay inside, but she wouldn't. She shook her head, firm. Not again. Not alone. He stared at her, then gave a single nod. He handed her a lantern. Stay close. They moved through the trees in silence. The trail was thin, just enough to fit a cart, but the brush had fresh breaks. Someone had come through recently. The scent of tobacco still lingered in the air. Then they saw it. A man's figure slumped against a tree, groaning. His horse had bolted, reins trailing in the brush. The man held one hand to his leg. Blood soaked through his pant leg. Isaac raised his voice, low and calm. You armed? The man raised his head slowly. It wasn't her father. It was a boy. 17, maybe 18 at best. His skin was pale with pain, but he raised his other hand weakly. I was trying to get away. Clara stepped forward before Isaac could stop her. Get away from who? The boy swallowed hard. Man on the ridge. Said he owned the trail. Said he was looking for a girl. Clara. Clara Willow. Her breath caught. Isaac's jaw locked. He turned to Clara. Help me lift him. Back at the ranch, they patched. Him up. The bullet had grazed the thigh, shallow but painful. Clara cleaned it while Isaac kept watch. The boy's name was Tom. He was a trapper's apprentice from the next valley over. Said he'd overheard a man asking for directions, offering money to anyone who could point to a ranch with a woman named Clara. What did he look like? Clara asked. Tom hesitated. Scar down his cheek, limp in his left leg, mean eyes, closed her eyes. It's him. Isaac paced the porch long after the lamps were blown out. He wasn't afraid of men, but he was afraid of what Clara's past might cost her future. The law wouldn't help. There was no paper trail, no court that would bother themselves with a girl given away like property. If her father came, he'd come expecting no resistance. He'd come believing she was still his to control. Isaac wouldn't allow that. The next morning, he took Clara up to the upper field. Help me dig, he said simply. She didn't ask questions. Together they worked for hours, turning up the dry soil, burying thick metal containers. When she finally asked what they were, he answered quietly. Supplies. If we need to hide or flee, I want you to have what you need. Clara's eyes welled. We won't run. Isaac paused. I won't let him hurt you. But I also won't let you bleed for my pride. She stepped forward, pressed a hand to his chest. Then we face him together. The next night, thunder rolled low across the hills, and with it came hooves, not slow, not wandering, purposeful. Isaac had been ready. He was already at the porch, rifle in hand. Clara stood beside him, lantern high. The light caught the man's face as he rode in close and dismounted like he owned the place. Her father hadn't changed. If anything, he looked worse, more hollow. His eyes were small with drink and his mouth twisted into a sneer the second he saw her. Clara. She said nothing. He looked her up and down. You look healthy. He feeding you? Isaac took a step forward. You need to leave. The man's eyes flicked to him. You must be the quiet husband. I'm the man who won't let you take her. The older man spat into the dirt. She's my daughter. Isaac's voice didn't rise. She's my wife. She's my property. Isaac raised the rifle. Not aimed, just a reminder. She's not anything to you. The man smirked. Law doesn't say so. Isaac tilted his head. You came here quoting law. That wiped the smile off his face. I came to get what's mine. Clara stepped forward now. You gave me away for a bottle. His voice rose. I raised you. You used me. She stood taller. And I won't be afraid of you anymore. Something in his eyes changed. Rage flared. He took one step forward, but Isaac cocked the rifle. The sound was sharp. Final. Next step is your last, he said. Her father hesitated. Then he did. Something none of them expected. He laughed. A long, bitter laugh. You think this ends with me? Isaac's hand didn't shake. It does, but the man simply turned, mounted his horse, and rode off without another word. That night they slept with one eye open. But morning came. Then another. And another. No return. No message. Just the wind in the trees and the quiet of work waiting to be done. Clara didn't trust the silence. Neither did Isaac. But slowly, days passed, and no shadow crossed their fence again. Then came spring. Clara was planting carrots when she felt it. A flutter in her belly. Not hunger, not nerves. Different. Isaac found her inside later that evening, seated on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. You all right? She looked up. I think I'm with child. He blinked, then sat down slowly beside her. But I thought... I know, she whispered. So did I. They said nothing for a long time. Then Isaac reached over, gently took her hand. I didn't think I'd ever be a father again. She turned to him, tears in her eyes. I didn't think I'd ever be a daughter, a wife, anything again. He pressed her hand to his chest. You're everything. But just as hope bloomed, a letter came again. No name, no signature, just 2 lines. You took what wasn't yours. I'll take it back. And this time, they weren't sure they'd survive it. The second letter shattered whatever illusion of peace they'd begun to build. Isaac found it nailed to the barn door one early morning. The paper damp from dew, the ink streaked but legible enough to chill him to his bones. Clara was still asleep. He didn't wake her. Not yet. He stood there for several minutes, just staring at the words. You took what wasn't yours. I'll take it back. He read it again, slower this time, as though the message might somehow change. But it didn't. It never did. He burned it in the stove. By the time Clara walked into the kitchen, barefoot and rubbing the sleep from her eyes, the letter was already ash. She knew something was wrong before he even turned around. The tension in the room sat on her chest like a weight. What happened? Isaac wiped his hands on a rag. Letter. She went still. Him? He nodded. She didn't ask what it said. She didn't have to. That day, Isaac reinforced the locks on the doors and windows. Moved supplies again, this time even closer. Rationed out what they'd need if they had to vanish into the trees for a while. He even fixed up the old hunter's shelter on the ridge, a place few knew existed. Clara helped him, but there was something dull in her movements. something uncertain. She knew what her father was capable of. The last time he'd come, he'd left a broken trail of bruises and threats behind. He didn't forgive. And he didn't forget. She sat on the edge of the porch that evening, hands folded in her lap, eyes distant. "What if I'm putting you in danger?" she whispered. Isaac, seated beside her, didn't flinch. "You're not putting me anywhere I haven't chosen to be." "But what if it gets worse?" He glanced at her belly. "Then we protect what's ours, all of it." A tear slipped down her cheek. He reached over and wiped it gently with his thumb. "I waited my whole life to have someone to protect, Clara. I'm not letting him scare me off." She pressed her head against his shoulder, and they stayed like that, silent, as the sky bled into stars. The next week passed without incident. Too quiet. Every crack of a branch, every distant hoofbeat, every unexpected silence made both of them freeze. Tom, the boy they'd helped, passed through again with fresh rabbits from his traps. He offered to stay and help. Isaac refused at first, but Clara insisted. 3 sets of eyes were better than 2. They set up watches. One slept, one stayed on patrol, and the third stayed with Clara. The tension was a noose around the house. Then, on the 4th night, the horses screamed. Isaac was already halfway to the door before Clara had even gotten her boots on. Tom was shouting near the barn. Something had spooked the horses bad. They were kicking against the stall doors, foaming at the mouth, panicked beyond reason. Tom pointed toward the edge of the pasture. Saw a shadow. Tall, didn't see no face. Isaac grabbed the rifle, back in the house, now. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. Neither did Clara. When morning came, they found a dead squirrel nailed to their gate. Its eyes had been gouged out. Isaac didn't let Clara see it. He pulled it down, buried it, and salted the post. They were being toyed with, hunted, not by someone looking to fight, but by someone looking to break them down first. Clara came up behind him as he washed his hands at the basin. "He's trying to scare us." Isaac looked over his shoulder. "It won't work." But it was already working. She looked smaller, more afraid. The fear she'd buried months ago had surfaced again. And now there was a child to worry about. Not just her life, both of theirs. "Scared," she admitted. He dried his hands and turned to her. "Good. It means you've got something to lose." That night they moved into the root cellar, a hidden chamber behind the cellar's shelves, a space that Isaac had carved out years ago, back when the land was wilder. A place no one but him had known. He brought Clara down there after sunset. Wrapped in blankets, Tom close behind. They set up a small oil lamp, and Isaac laid the rifle across his knees. And they waited. Hours passed. Then, just before midnight, footsteps overhead. Heavy. Measured. Isaac stood instantly. Tom froze, clutching. A knife. Clara grabbed Isaac's arm. "Don't go." He held her gaze for a moment, then shook his head. "I have to." He moved in silence up the narrow wooden stairs, careful not to let them creak. When he reached the hidden door, he waited, listened. Nothing now. Whoever had passed above was gone. He cracked the door and stepped out into the pitch-dark kitchen. Moonlight filtered through the curtains. The house was undisturbed. Then something clattered outside. The porch. He moved slow, rifle raised. When he opened the front door, it was empty until he looked down. There, placed neatly on the mat, was a doll, cloth, old. One button eye missing, but stitched into its chest, in crude black thread, were 3 letters, E-I-C, W. Clara, Willow. He brought it back down into the cellar and laid it beside Clara without saying a word. She stared at it, then covered her mouth and sobbed. Isaac sank down beside her, holding her as tight as he could. She shook in his arms. I can't do this again." "Yes, you can." he whispered into her hair, "because he doesn't get to win this time." The next day, Isaac changed his plan. He knew something now. This wasn't just fear. It was war. A man like that wasn't going to barge in. He'd pick and pick until they broke apart from the inside. Isaac went into town. He found the marshal, told him everything, the threats, the letters, the evidence. But the law gave him a familiar shrug. "No proof it's him. No name. No crime I can stick to him yet." Isaac leaned in across the desk. "He's coming for a woman who doesn't belong to him anymore. Is she registered with you as wife?" Isaac said nothing. He'd never filed the papers. The marshal sighed. "That makes it harder." Isaac stood. "Then I'll do what's necessary." The marshal looked up sharply. "Don't make it worse." Isaac met his eyes. "I'll make it final." That night, Isaac told Clara everything, about the lack of legal proof, about how the law wouldn't act unless they had a name or blood. "We need to make it official," he said quietly. She blinked. "What?" "Marriage. Real, on paper, with witnesses." Tears sprang to her eyes again, but this time for a different reason. "You're not doing this to save me?" He shook his head slowly. "No, I'm doing it because I can't imagine another day without you." They married the next morning. Tom stood as the witness. They did it under the old pine on the ridge, just the three of them, and after the final. Words were spoken. Isaac kissed her hand, then her cheek, and whispered, "Now you're mine, in every way that matters." But as they walked back down the trail, smoke, thick and rising, from the direction of their house, Isaac dropped the bouquet in his hand and ran. Clara screamed. By the time they reached the property, the barn was ablaze. Horses scattered in panic. The flames licked at the sky. And nailed. To the fence, burned around the edges, was a sign carved into old wood. "You can bury a dog, but it still remembers its master." Isaac clenched his fists, staring into the inferno. "This ends tonight." He sent Clara and Tom back into the cellar, gave Clara a pistol, just in case. Then he mounted the last remaining horse, strapped, his rifle to his back, and followed the smoke trail back into the woods. The hunter had become the hunted. Isaac didn't need sleep. He needed closure. Isaac tracked through the woods like a man born to shadows. The trail left behind by the arsonist wasn't made with care. It was a message in itself. Broken branches, a half-buried horseshoe, and crushed grass meant the man wasn't hiding. He wanted to be followed. He was confident. Arrogant. Isaac rode for miles into the foothills that rose jagged beyond the edge of the valley, places no one ventured unless they had something to run from, or toward. Clara's father had always been a coward, but cowards turned into beasts when cornered, and Isaac knew he was walking straight into the lion's mouth. Still, it didn't matter. If he didn't go, Clara would never be safe. Not now, not ever. The sky above darkened, clouds dragging across the horizon like bruises. Thunder rumbled low and steady, echoing Isaac's heartbeat. By the time he reached the edge of the high cliffs, rain had started falling in slow, heavy drops, as if the heavens themselves were mourning something not yet lost, but soon to be. Then he saw it, a campsite, fresh fire, tent still warm. Horse, tethered loosely nearby. No movement. He dismounted and approached slowly. He didn't call out, didn't announce, because he already knew who was inside. The tent flap fluttered in the wind. Isaac kicked it open with his boot and found him there, Clara's father, half drunk, soaked with rain, sitting on a crate with a bottle in one hand and a pistol on the other knee. "You took something that wasn't yours," the man rasped, not even looking up. Isaac stepped inside, keeping his hand near his own weapon. "She's not a thing," the man laughed. "Oh, she was always good at pretending she was something special. But I know her. I made her. No, Isaac said. You destroyed her, and she built herself back up. That got the man's attention. His head jerked up, eyes glassy but full of old fire. Who do you think you are? Isaac took another step closer. Her husband. He stood straight, unmoving, voice like stone. And you're trespassing. The older man rose slowly, pistol dangling now from his fingers. She always thought she was better than where she came from. Thought she could run off and make herself into something new. But you don't get to erase blood. You're right, Isaac said, but you can replace it. He drew his rifle. Faster. Smarter. The pistol in the other man's hand hadn't even lifted when the rifle butt knocked it aside, and Isaac's fist drove straight into his jaw. The drunk staggered, roaring, reaching for a knife this time. Isaac didn't wait. He tackled the man to the ground, fists slamming into years of rage, shame, grief. It wasn't just for Clara. It was for every scar he'd imagined on her arms, every tremble in her voice, every time she'd flinched in her sleep. The rain poured harder, a storm now, roaring around them. Isaac pinned him down, soaked to the bone, chest heaving. Stay away from her, Isaac said through gritted teeth. You won't get another warning. Blood in the man's mouth. A bitter grin. She ain't worth the fight. Isaac stood, rifle trained on his chest. She's worth everything. He didn't kill him, but he left the man's gun crushed underfoot and his campfire scattered to ash. He rode home soaked, cold, and bruised, but alive, and Clara was waiting at the edge of the property with Tom beside her, tears streaking down. Her cheeks as soon as she saw him. She ran before he even dismounted, arms thrown around him, crying into his chest. You came back. He held her tight, burying his face in her wet hair. I always will. They rebuilt the barn. Tom helped, and Isaac gave him a place in the shed until he could find his own. Clara insisted on painting the new boards herself. Bright, fresh, color, like sunlight after storm clouds. For the first time since she'd arrived, she walked freely across the porch, barefoot, unafraid. They filed the marriage papers officially. The marshal came out himself to deliver them. He didn't say much, just tipped his hat and nodded once toward Isaac. We got eyes on the hills now. If he steps into town, we'll know. Isaac just nodded, but Clara gripped his hand tighter. After the man rode off, I never want to run again. You won't, Isaac promised. They sat that evening in the rocking chairs on the porch, baby growing slowly beneath Clara's hand. The sun dipped low, casting golden light over the pasture. What, do you think it'll be? She asked. Isaac looked over at her. Boy, just like you. Stubborn. Brave. Always talking back. She smiled, soft and quiet. You'd be proud of that? I already am. Her smile faded a little. What if he comes back? He will, Isaac said simply. But this time we'll be ready. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. No sign, no letters, just silence. They planted a garden, Clara's idea. Isaac had never grown much beyond hay, but she insisted on tomatoes and green beans and squash. It'll give us something to count on, she said. Isaac didn't understand it at first, but over time, the ritual of tending to the small shoots gave them peace. Something to anchor their days. But peace, as Isaac had learned, always comes with a price. One morning, Clara went to check on the tomato patch. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, shaking. Isaac came running at the sound of Tom's voice calling out for him. In the center of the patch, placed with care, was another doll. Smaller, darker hair, 2 button eyes this time, and on its dress, stitched again in coarse black thread, M.W. Miriam Willow, Clara's mother. They didn't know what it meant, not yet, but Isaac knew it wasn't over. He sat that night with the lantern lit, pen in hand. He started writing his will, just in case. Clara caught him and shook her head violently, tears returning fast. Don't do that. Don't talk like that. I have to, he said quietly. If he won't stop, then I'll make sure you're protected, no matter what happens. She fell apart again, but this time she didn't run away. She leaned into him, clung to him, until the lantern burned out and the sky turned black again. Isaac began setting traps along the tree line. Wires, bells, hidden nails. No one would get close again without alerting them. But it wasn't the man who came next. It was a stranger, a woman, middle-aged, pale hands, limp in one leg. She knocked on their door just before sunset, with her shawl pulled tight and her face hard. "Clara Willow?" she asked. Clara stepped out behind Isaac. "Yes?" The woman held out a yellowed letter. "He's dead." Isaac stiffened. Clara didn't move. The woman nodded once. "He drowned in Clear River 2 days ago. Was found clutching a burned piece of paper. Had your name on it." Clara opened the letter. She didn't read it aloud. She just folded it, tucked it into her apron, and said, "Thank you," then closed the door. That night, Clara sat on the porch, steps long after Isaac had gone inside. When he returned to check on her, she handed him the letter. He read it. One line. "Tell my daughter I was wrong. That was it." No apology, no reason, no story. Just that. Clara stared ahead. Maybe he meant it. Maybe, Isaac said. But they both knew healing never came from a letter alone. It had to come from within, and that would take time. But they had time now. They had each other. They had peace. Real peace. And by the time the baby came, a boy just like Isaac had guessed, Clara was no longer afraid of the past. She had chosen her future. Isaac named the boy Silas. Not after anyone in his bloodline. There wasn't much left to honor there, but after a tree he used to carve from, as a boy, one that grew crooked at the root but stood strong through wind and snow. It seemed fitting for the child of two people who had been broken and bent and left behind, but never beaten. Clara smiled when she first held him. Not the shy smile Isaac had known when she arrived with her shoulders hunched and her voice quiet, but something deeper. Whole. She looked at that baby like she was finally staring into the life she'd always dreamed of, but never dared imagine. Could be hers. Silas was born in the early dawn of a rainy spring morning, and Isaac never left her side. He held her hand through every hour, wiped the sweat from her brow, and whispered to her that she was safe, that she was strong, that she was his heart. When Silas let out his first cry, it didn't sound weak or scared. It sounded loud and sure, as if the child had been waiting for his cue all along. Tom helped deliver the baby. Clara didn't want anyone else. She trusted him like a brother now. His hands were steady, his voice low and kind. Isaac had paid him for every month he stayed, but Tom never once took a coin until the boy was born. "This ain't payment," he'd said when Isaac tried again that night, slipping him a small pouch. "This is family." They buried the last doll. It stayed in a tin box near the base of a sycamore out in the far field. Clara wanted it there, not to remember the threat, but to remember that it ended. That she won. Isaac carved a little wooden marker with no name on it. Just a small cross, and below it, Clara pressed her palm into the wet soil and left it to dry. Her print would stay there for years, even long after the weather wore the wood down. Because it wasn't just a symbol of survival, it was a promise. To herself. The nightmares didn't end immediately. Isaac would wake up sometimes to find her sitting at the edge of the bed, breathing shallow, eyes wide. But over time, they lessened. And when they came, he didn't speak much, just pulled her close until the storm passed. And when he had his own, when his own ghosts returned in dreams too thick to push aside, she would hold his hand, rub his back, and say softly, "You're home now. You're here." They didn't live perfectly, but they lived fully. Clara learned to laugh again. Isaac heard her laugh for the first time one afternoon when Silas sneezed mid-cry and scared himself into hiccups. She couldn't stop, laughing for 5 minutes straight, tears rolling down her face as she tried to shush him, only making it worse with her giggles. Isaac stood there in the kitchen, holding a cracked cup of coffee, just watching her like a man who had been blind his whole life and was seeing color for the first time. He wrote again. Stories. Not long ones, and nothing he'd ever send to town, but ones Clara asked for in the evenings, ones that Tom would listen to with wide eyes. Isaac wrote about people like them, folks with scars but not tragedies. He gave his characters endings that didn't feel like endings at all, just quiet new beginnings. In sleep, Clara woke beside him, fingers still in his. She didn't scream, didn't cry, just whispered, "I'll see you soon." They buried him beneath the sycamore tree, same spot where they'd buried the last doll. Only this time, the marker read, "Husband, Father, Redeemer. We were lost, and he made us whole." Clara stayed on the porch most days after that, hair gray, hands folded, heart full. Silas came every Sunday, with his wife and children. And every Sunday before the sun set, Clara told them stories. Real ones, hard ones, and beautiful ones. Like the time a quiet rancher took in a virgin girl sold by her drunk father, and found more than a family. He found salvation and gave it back tenfold to her, to himself, and to every soul lucky enough to love them.